Hello there, and welcome to the latest riveting episode of the Scot Goes Popcast. My name's James Kelly, and I'm joined today by Lisa Keogh, who is standing as an Alba Party candidate for Angus Council in the forthcoming local elections. She'll be one of the best known Alba candidates standing in May because she made UK-wide headlines last year when Arbroath University took disciplinary action against her for expressing gender-critical views in a seminar. Although she was eventually cleared of the allegations against her, the investigation dragged on for weeks and coincided with her final exams and disrupted them. Hi, Lisa. How are you today?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad. It's a really lovely day here. I don't know what it's like where you are.
Actually, it's really nice out today. Actually, I think we're hitting about 12 degrees, which is warm for Scotland.
Oh, it's roasting. When I was out, it's probably the sunshine that makes it feel so warm. So a lot of people will know about what happened to you last year, but there will be some people who don't. So I was just wondering if you could, talk us through what happened to you in that fateful seminar. I think it was an online seminar, wasn't it?
Yeah, so because of the pandemic, all the classes were online at this point, and I had initially wanted to go into intellectual property, but there was no space left on that module. So the only one left was gender, feminism and the law. So I was like, right, well, I'm going to have to do it. I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea about the trans debate. I mean, I was essentially, I'd say I was living under a rock, but I'm a mum, so I was doing all the school stuff and the after school activities. I didn't have time for YouTube and checking out all this stuff between university work and everything. So I went into this pretty much blind. In the first seminar, we were talking about women's rights and things like that, and that all seemed quite fine. Until somebody had said to me to define what a woman was, because I can't remember exactly what was said, but somebody had mentioned like trans women, and I said, well, you can't say that a trans woman's a woman because they're men, so you mean biological women? And they said, well, define a woman. Actually, it was a lecturer who asked me to define what a woman was, and obviously it was a law class, so I'm going to use like the logical terminology. So I just said, a woman's someone that's born with a vagina and, most cases, the ability to reproduce. And they started calling me a transphobe. And I was like, no, I'm not a transphobe. I'm telling you what a woman is. I'm a woman. I've given birth. And I know not all women can give birth, but that's what a woman is. So we could type it down because it was a Teams call. So I thought, right, I'll type it because obviously they've got their wires crossed somewhere. So I stupidly typed, a biological woman is somebody with a vagina and the ability to reproduce. And it just got worse. They just started calling me really horrible names and things. I got called a typical cis white girl, and I had never been called this in my life. So I was like, right, okay, I'm going to Google that and see what that is. So I Googled the word cis, and it meant just a woman that's like born a woman. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know there was a word for that. So after that, I went into the next one and we were talking about transgender people again. It seemed to be quite a theme. So we were talking about, I had said you can't compare a trans woman to a woman because my children do mixed martial arts. I was aware of the Fallon Fox story. Fallon Fox broke a woman's skull in, I think it was 37 seconds. And the woman actually said she'd never been hit with force like that. Yeah. So I cited that article and I said, well, if you look at Fallon Fox has gone through male puberty and is by all intents and purposes a man. So essentially you've got a man in the octagon beating up a woman. Nope, that's transphobic, you can't say that. And I'm like, but Fallon Fox biologically is a man, so that made it even worse. And then went to another seminar and they were talking about all men being rapists and how all men should be locked up after 6 o'clock at night. And somebody actually said to me that my children were going to be rapists because they were male. And wouldn't it be funny if somebody assaulted my children just because they were born with penises? And I was like, all right, okay. So I said, not all men are rapists. You can't say all men are rapists and you can't go locking men up after 6 o'clock at night. That's sexist. And at which point that was another part of the complaint, that I said not all men were rapists. So when I got obviously taken for the investigation, and I'd said to the investigating officer, what am I here for? Because I've just had an email saying that I've made offensive comments in class. What are the offensive comments? And she was like, well, I'm not going to speak about that just now. We'll tease it out through the meeting. So we got to the point where she started asking questions and she said, did you say that only women have vaginas? I was like, yeah. She went, can you see why that's offensive? And it was that point the penny dropped that I was getting investigated for saying that women have vaginas.
Yeah.
And I was like, hang on, wait a minute, is that that's the question I'm getting reprimanded for. I went, can you see why that's offensive? And she said, oh, I'm not allowed to answer the questions. I was like, all right, okay. She said, did you see that biology is fact? And I was like, yeah, it's a podcast.
Well, that's very offensive.
Did you say that not all men are rapists? Well, yeah, they're not. And did you say that men are stronger than women? I said, yeah, physically men are stronger than women. And I actually used my own experience in the class. I was a mechanic. I'm a qualified mechanic.
Yeah.
And when I was working in the garage, obviously the men were stronger than me.
Yeah.
And I would ask them to lift like heavy things, or, you know, obviously it took a few of us to hold an engine up or hold a gearbox up when the car was above you. But there was some things I physically couldn't pick up myself because I was a young girl. And I said, you know, so I backed up everything I said. And I was like, so men genetically are stronger than women. They get like that rush of testosterone when they go through puberty. They've got bigger lungs, they've got bigger hands. Like they're just different. Men and women are just different. Men can't carry children because they just can't. But yeah, these were the offensive comments that I made. And they're not offensive. It's basic biology. Men can't carry children. Men are stronger on the biggest scale. Like men generally are stronger than women. Obviously, you're going to get some women that are stronger than men because you get bodybuilding and weightlifting competitions where you're going to have women there that are stronger than men. But on an everyday scenario, men are stronger than women.
So it's not the most important part of what the complaints, but just as a pure matter of interest, what was the relevance of the not all men are rapists to the complaint? Because that doesn't seem to, well, first of all, it doesn't seem to be a particularly controversial view. And secondly, it doesn't seem to relate to the rest of it. So why were they complaining about that?
I have no idea. Like, to be honest, I genuinely have got no idea, because when they said that, I drew a comparison, and I also said to them, you know, you've all got fathers, brothers, boyfriends, grandfathers. Are you saying that they're all rapists? And obviously they just wouldn't answer. I tried to engage with the lecturer, and I kind of tried to pin her down, and I drew a scenario to her, how basically categorizing all of one, I can't remember the word, but essentially I just said to her, you can't say that one batch of people, just because they're this, you can't categorize them and say that they're all this because they have this in common. And she wouldn't engage. So the not all men are rapists, I don't understand why I got in trouble for that. I don't understand the relevance. You can't go around and say that all men are rapists.
So nobody was even putting a counter view to that to explain why that was offensive?
But they never explained why anything was offensive.
Okay,
so I actually asked, when I was in the interview with the whole vagina comment, I said to her, am I in trouble for saying the word vagina? I was like, should I use something a bit fluffier, like a foo-foo, or, you know, something a bit politer? Is that what I'm in trouble for? And she wouldn't engage. She wouldn't tell me what was offensive about the comments. And to this day, nobody's told me what's offensive towards the comments, and I've never had an apology either. And obviously that investigation went on for 2 months while I was doing my final exams, while I was doing my final presentations, and I was writing my dissertation as well. So for a stressful situation, it was made a whole lot worse. And I know I was exonerated, but for me, the whole process was a punishment. I didn't sleep like properly for weeks. I wasn't eating properly. It was a stressful time that totally could have been avoided. And in all fairness, I could have put in complaints about what happened in that class with them speaking about my children the way they did, but I didn't, because we were in the very end of the year. We were all about to graduate. There was no point in putting unnecessary stress on people.
I gather that they were pointing out that, well, they were talking about the tone of what you were saying, not so much the content, the tone of what you were saying. And I would have thought that makes it quite hard for you. That's quite conveniently makes it quite hard for you to defend yourself in the court of public opinion, because unless you had taken a recording of the whole thing, you wouldn't have been able to prove one way or the other of what the tone was. And you know what people are like, they'll say there's no smoke without fire, and you must have been saying it in an aggressive way or something like that. And you can't disprove that because it's impossible. The
classes were all recorded.
Oh, they were all recorded. Okay.
It was never said for a minute that it was the tone of what I said. That never ever came up. The tone never came into it. And most of what I said, because obviously when I was speaking, the lecturer actually muted me at one point because she didn't like my opinion.
Yeah.
I'd not go too much into that, but she did mute me at one point. So I did most of it via typing, because it was the only way I could get coherently what I was saying across, without it getting twisted. So for them to come out later and say it was to do with the tone when it was never ever about the tone was nonsense, because most of what I said was typed down. And like I say, all the classes were recorded. I actually pointed that out to the university because the university didn't even know.
So do you have the recording, or is it just?
The recordings were available to me. So the recordings are still there.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, something that a lot of people pick up on is that you weren't in a sort of module of choice, so to speak. It was your second choice. So a lot of people would probably assume that this is something you really feel strongly about. You're almost militant about. You just went in there to argue with people. It's not like that at all, is it? It was just something that cropped up, and unless you had just kept quiet about what your honest opinions were, that would have inevitably have happened.
It does sound silly now that I know about all of this stuff. It does sound a little bit naive on my part that I didn't know about this, but I genuinely had no idea about any of this stuff. As for, I got told by a few people, why didn't you just keep your mouth shut? Well, when somebody's saying that all men are rapists and there's not a man in the room to defend them, I think somebody's got to stand up and say, you know what, no, not all men are rapists. I think when people are, it was a debate class, so we were in active debate, and I think I was as entitled to have my opinion as they were, and I put it across respectfully, and I evidenced everything that I put across as well. So for me, I couldn't have kept my mouth shut, because some of the things that I've not spoke about and I can't speak about that happened in that class, nobody in the right mind would have stayed quiet on it.
Okay, so it was specifically a debate class. So that was the purpose of it being of you being there, and the whole purpose was for you to give a view which might be different to other people's views. I mean,
yeah, well, it was a debate class, and I think like it was more of an agony aunt class, if I'm being honest, than a debate class, but it was supposed to be a debate class.
Well, I mean, there was a time when students really thrived on debate, and if you encountered a view that you found really objectionable, what you would do is you would argue against that, and you would take great pride in discrediting it. But instead, the first recourse these days seems to be to try and make that view go away by, there's a spectrum of ways of doing that, sort of unplatforming someone, or petitioning an institution to no platform them, or to try and get them sacked, or to even try and criminalize what they're saying.
Well, actually, when I was in, I think it was either first or second year, because I did 7 years at uni, I did forensic psychobiology, then moved on to law. And when I was in forensic psychobiology, there was a few debate classes that I attended, and you know what, they were great. We used to bring priests in, we used to bring people in from different cultures, and we would debate on things, and nobody got hurt feelings, and it was all very active and lively. And for me, that's what a debate's all about. If you don't like what someone's saying, argue your point.
But it's almost scary to think it might actually, the reason they do that, the reason they try and shut their views down completely is it's actually more effective. It probably has a better effect for them than actually trying to win a debate, which they might not win.
Do you know what all they did, I think, is in trying to silence me, they made me look into something a bit more, and they've actually made me quite passionate about something. Yeah.
A lot of people will be cynical and think you must have been passionate about it before. You wouldn't have known all these things. You wouldn't have been able to argue in the way you did unless you really felt strongly about it. But that's not the case.
No, it absolutely wasn't the case. I genuinely didn't have a clue about any of this stuff. I knew about the Fallon Fox thing purely because my partner had mentioned it to me in the past, and when I told him about this, so I had a quick look at the Fallon Fox thing, and obviously the boys are into martial arts, so I had an understanding of martial arts, but yeah, I had no idea about any of this sort of trans stuff that was going on. As far as I was aware, I remember watching Big Brother when I was about 9 or 10.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, I remember that series of Big Brother, and I remember
Nadia.
Yeah, well, Nadia, yeah. And it was on Big Brother's Little Brother, which I used to watch because I was much younger back then. There was Ian Lee. I don't know if you know the TV presenter Ian Lee. Well, anyways, and he went on, and I was thinking back to that. What was that, 2003, 2004, something like that? And he made jokes about Nadia, about her voice and the technology that had, turned her from a man into a woman. And there were jokes and people were laughing. And I thought, if he said that now, his career would be over in an instant. So, I mean, this is not something that's been going on for decades. This is a very recent phenomenon.
It's like I say, I remember Nadia on Big Brother, and that was the only thing I'd ever heard about transgender stuff, and it had never ever come into my life again. And I didn't really think much of it, to be honest. It wasn't something that I gave a second thought to. In fact, I think in Orange is the New Black as well, there was a transgender prisoner in there. And I obviously watched this and before any of this stuff, and I didn't give it a second thought that they had a transgender person in a women's prison. It didn't occur to me until afterwards, and looking back, it's like, oh, I can see how wrong that is, because I think there was one part in the series that the transgender person stopped taking their estrogen because there was a riot or whatever, and obviously the testosterone started building back up in the body and things like that. But at the time, it was just a TV show, and I didn't give it a second thought.
Yeah. So you were saying earlier that the process was the punishment, because even though you were found not to be guilty of what you were accused of, it was effectively a punishment for the complaint because you went through a great deal of stress and it might have affected the outcome of your degree. I don't know whether it did or not, but it might potentially have done that. Do you think it did?
I think I could have done better had I not had the stress coming over me. It's certainly, I didn't give it my full everything. There was the final exam I had on the day that they had a meeting about me. And when I was doing that exam, I mean, I didn't complete it till about 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't even reference it properly. It was just a case of I was so stressed out because I knew this investigation was taking place that day, and I just wanted the exam over and done with so that I could finish the dissertation, do all my checks on that. And I was really just putting one foot in front of the other and just trying to get through the days. And I was worried because the university had essentially put it to me that if I'd apologised, it would all go away. But I wasn't going to apologise because I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd expressed my viewpoint in a debate class, and whether or not my view is right or wrong, the fact of the matter was I expressed my opinion, which I was more than entitled to do.
So if the process is the punishment, is it also the deterrent? Is it also that, other people are going to look at this, and even though you were not found to be guilty of the complaints, people will think, I am not going to put myself through that. I'm not going to risk putting myself through that. And so you're going to get to a situation where it's only going to be a very small minority of people, a very special sort of person who is going to think, I don't care what the consequences are. I'm going to say this anyway. I'll take that risk because I feel really strongly about it. But 90% of people will be deterred. And the effect of that is artificially, the views that you expressed will artificially be made to seem rarer and sort of not the norm and unusual and strange. And do you think almost that is the point of making the complaint in the first place?
I think so, because I think with the people that made the complaint about me, I think they were hoping it would just check me in line and it would just suppress my thoughts and stop me from speaking out. So yeah, I think it's not about whose opinion's right or wrong. It's about silencing the alternate opinion. And I think universities should be a place where people can express free speech and have lively debate. And they're really not now. When I first started university, it was a very different time. And that's only over the course of 7 years. But now, I honestly don't think anybody would come out and state facts because of the process. The process is stressful. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, which is part of the reason why I didn't report them for what they said about my children.
This free speech is quite a tricky thing, isn't it? Because, I mean, you don't just have to be theoretically free to say something. You also have to be sort of free from the kind of pressure that makes you self-censor what you say. Yeah. So when you were dealing with the complaint, you had backing from the SNP MP, Joanna Cherry. I gather you also had backing from the Free Speech Union, which is an organisation that was set up by the slightly controversial right-wing commentator, I suppose is the correct word, Toby Young. Did you have any qualms about that? I mean, I suppose if you're in that situation, when the odds are against you, you accept the help that's offered. But did you have any qualms about an association with the organisation set up by Toby Young? Because I could imagine people would say, oh, well, this shows your real agenda. It's right-wing and socially conservative and all that.
Again, I didn't have a clue who the Free Speech Union were. So I had been given somebody to contact from a friend who said, this person might be able to help you out. So I contacted them and I said, look, I've been investigated for this. This is what's happened. I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose my degree, but I can't apologise. So this friend said to me, here, I'm a member of the Free Speech Union. Give them a call. So I had a quick scan through their homepage. I didn't read who was involved or anything. To be fair, I hadn't even heard of Toby Young, if I'm being honest. I had a quick scan through, sent an email just outlining what happened, and Fraser, who helped me, he called me the next day and I just explained everything that was happening. And he was like, don't worry about it, we'll sort it. And then obviously it went to the papers and everything, which I wasn't entirely happy about with the timing. I was kind of hoping that we could sort it out, and if it had to go national, it would be after the exams, but that was sort of beyond my control at that point. I was just grateful that I actually had someone in my corner helping me.
Did you find the Free Speech Union helpful?
To begin with, Fraser was fantastic. So they did help me through the initial hurdles.
All right, free speech. I mean, I suppose it's easy to argue for free speech when you're upholding the right of somebody to speak when you agree with their views. But it's the really tricky part is when it's a view that you find offensive. I mean, how do you approach that when you hear views that are alien to you, or I don't know, like offensive comments about women or something like that? Would you feel that those comments should be unsayable, or do you think, all right, I find that offensive, but I would defend that person's right to say it?
I would defend anyone's right to free speech, because I think, looking back in history, the only reason we have got this far and progressed this much as people is because we've listened to alternate views. So as much as I might not agree with someone's views, that doesn't mean that they don't have the right to say them. And for me, I think there's a line, I've been asked this before, is there a line between free speech and discrimination? Well, there is, because for me, free speech is saying your opinion, but then you've got discrimination. You could call out somebody, well, you're a specky person because you've got glasses, whereas that's discrimination. So there is a fine line between free speech and discrimination, and I would uphold anyone's right to free speech, whether they think trans women are men, if they think the grass is blue. I don't care what your opinion is, you're entitled to have that.
Yeah, that's right, because there is a sort of distinction. I mean, there's a kind of overlap at the moment because gender critical feminists are particularly under attack. Their right to speak is particularly under attack. There's a kind of overlap between people arguing for free speech and people arguing for gender critical feminism, but it is two distinct things. And you could have, and I probably have seen examples of this, of gender critical feminists who think the other side's views should be shut down. But on the other hand, you've also got people who oppose gender critical views who would very much defend the right of somebody like you to say what you do. Do you have any, I mean, on the issue of trans rights, do you have any opinion on where the boundary does lie, on where that would become, what sort of thing could be said that would be discriminatory and it would be offensive and shouldn't be said and possibly should be against the law?
Well, I think regarding trans rights, I don't think, I get confused. I don't think biological men should be allowed to enter women's safe spaces. I think that absolutely should be against the law, because for me, there's women out there that have been victims of domestic abuse, of rape. And I think if you're in a changing room where you feel quite vulnerable and a man walks in and says he's a woman, that's going to terrify you. And I think that should be illegal. But then the flip side is, I believe that they should be allowed to argue for third spaces, not to share women's spaces, but I think they should be allowed their own arguments.
Should they be allowed to argue for entry into women's safe spaces? Should they be allowed to say that even if they're not allowed to do it?
Oh, they should be allowed to argue anything.
Yeah, okay.
You can argue for anything that you want. I don't disagree with that, but I think you've got to take common sense and safety into consideration. So allowing men into women's safe spaces isn't safe, and it's not logical, but they should be allowed to argue for it. Of course they should.
So just out of interest, I mean, one argument that's here, I mean, not about the free speech issue, but about the issue of safe spaces itself. One argument that's made is that at the moment, trans women, who you would argue are biological men, are allowed to enter women's safe spaces in some circumstances. That's already legal. And so they say it's sort of disingenuous to talk about GRA reform or as if that would be a change when in fact these things are already legal.
I think I've heard a lot on this, and I think apparently trans women have been entering women's safe spaces for years. Well, I've never encountered it. That doesn't mean it's not happened, but my problem isn't even that. My problem is the fact that we're now creating a loophole for predatory men to gain access to women, which for me is a big no.
Do you think the issue is that this will enable people who don't look like women to enter women's safe spaces? Maybe the issue before has been that people who actually look like women could go in, but now it's more people who are essentially look like men who are now able to enter.
Well, yeah, essentially, I think you could now walk into a women's safe space and say, "Hi, I'm Betty," and we would have to accept that you're Betty, and we would not be allowed to question that now. And I think that's
if you did question it, I could call you a transphobe.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been called transphobe lots and a bigot, so it doesn't bother me anymore. But no, I think, and a lot of women in these spaces, a lot of women would just turn the other way and be worried and have that sort of fear, or better not say anything, there's a man in here. But there will be the odd room that'll be like, right, you, come on, get out, you're in the wrong changing room, and power to them.
To go back to the free speech issue, I was astonished a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember which episode of the J.K. Rowling controversy it was, but people were starting to say people shouldn't read Harry Potter books, and I get offended by people who read Harry Potter books, and we're going to have a discussion about this. We need to have a kind of conversation about whether it's acceptable to read Harry Potter books or to be seen with Harry Potter material. Do you not find that extraordinary?
I do think it's just crazy. I think offence is subjective as well. So just because somebody's taken offence to it doesn't mean it's offensive. To cancel somebody because of their views is just, it's bonkers.
Did you see that? I don't know if it was a journalist or somebody, a man anyway. He was criticising J.K. Rowling on TV, and he was basically saying she knew what she was doing. She knew what the consequences would be, so she's got nobody to blame but herself. But it's like, I mean, is it not the consequences that are the problem? Because and that's what makes it something that's interesting to say, because you should be pushing back against consequences which nobody should have to face for simply expressing their own views.
The thing is, this didn't happen years and years ago. This is all quite new. I've never heard of somebody getting cancelled because of their views, unless it was something totally extreme, like, I don't know, I can't even think of anything, but if it was an extreme, dangerous view, like inciting violence or something like that, then yeah, fair enough. You know, maybe not cancelling them, but you can't go around inciting violence. But to say that trans women are not biological women, there's nothing offensive about that. Whether or not J.K. Rowling knew what she was doing, I don't know, because I don't really know enough about the situation. I wasn't sort of into any of this back then, but I don't know. She doesn't deserve the harassment she's had since. She put a tweet up saying that basically she could wallpaper her house with death threats, and that's outrageous. Yeah.
I mean, just as a final thought about free speech, I mean, I'm not going to ask your opinion about war, but just as a sort of general observation on my part, I do. One of the things I find really depressing about being in a war situation, well, of course, there are many things that are more depressing than this, is the fact that there's tens of thousands of people potentially losing their lives, is the way that the parameters of what people are allowed to say, not because of the law, but just because of social pressure, becomes so narrow. Everything becomes reduced to good guys and bad guys. And I mean, the way I look at it is that, you know, it's a bit of a cop-out to talk. I mean, everybody knows that Russia is the aggressor. Everybody knows that's the basic problem is Russia invading a sovereign country and indiscriminately killing people. But it's kind of a cop-out to virtue signal and go on about how awful Russia is, because ultimately the problem in Russia would be solved by the Russian people, and we could actually devote our energies to putting pressure on our own governments to do, because I mean, the causes of this conflict, part of it is Russia's possession of nuclear weapons. We could have done something over the preceding decades to move forward to nuclear disarmament. Britain is one of the 9 nuclear powers, and we have done absolutely nothing. And we could have reformed the UN. Another problem is that Russia has veto powers in the UN. Have we done anything? No, because we benefit from those veto powers. And you don't see popular opinion and commentators in the Daily Mail saying we should do something about this, but that's the thing we could actually affect. You know, it's a cop-out just to feel good about ourselves because we're saying what a bad man Vladimir Putin is, and I think that kind of feeds into the free speech issue. But I suppose war is a very special and unique situation.
I've seen last week or the week before, actually, Mark Zuckerberg's made it, and he's allowed people to incite death or wish for death on Vladimir Putin. And I don't agree with that. Like, for me, that's inciting violence. Like, say it if you want, but I don't agree that you should be allowed to say that.
Okay,
so let's wishing death on people.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to talk about your move into politics. You're standing as an Alba candidate. I would have given the name of the ward you're standing in, but I don't know how to pronounce it. Could you tell us how to pronounce it?
It's Arbroath West, Letham and Freakham.
All right. Okay. Right. So, I mean, has there always been a sort of impulse to go into politics, or has this been sort of prompted by what happened to you last year?
It's a bit of both, to be fair. I've always had a keen interest in politics, and I've always felt with my life experience I could do a lot. I grew up in really horrible times. My mum was a drug user, my dad was a drug user, and we grew up in poverty, and it was horrible. And I think we're now in the 2022, and there's still children growing up in poverty, not for the same reasons I did. I don't think we don't have the same need for people to be grown up in poverty. We don't have the same need for families to be in poverty, but I find more and more you've got people that are working 2 and 3 jobs that are in poverty. And I think in politics, that's something that I could change. I feel passionately about helping people. I feel passionately about helping children. I think all children should be equal no matter whose children they are or where they're from. And I think going into politics, I could really make a difference there if I can get into politics, if I'm elected in, and hopefully I can go far. But my main reason for wanting to go into politics is to help the little guy, is to help the people that really need it, because there's not enough politicians that do that.
Okay, that's interesting. Your priority really would be poverty. I mean, I know you obviously be interested in the gender issue as well and free speech and all that, but your real priority for this campaign would be poverty.
Yeah, I've got a passion in poverty. I think, like I say, I've got a lot of life experience in that sense of how I grew up, and if I could combat poverty single-handedly, I would. It'll never happen, and I think it's going to be a very hard topic to combat, but it's something that I am very, very passionate about.
So when you joined Alba, obviously you're very much in tune with the policy on women's rights, but have you also had a look at the policies on poverty? And so that's something you're very comfortable with, yeah?
Yeah.
So what do you think your chances of being elected are? Because I was having a look at the past history of the ward, and it's quite interesting because Angus, the whole council area of Angus, it used to be an SNP stronghold when nowhere else in Scotland voted SNP. Back in the 70s and 80s and late 80s and the 90s, Angus was always a place that elected an SNP MP, even where hardly anywhere else did. But at the last council elections in 2017, it went very much the other way, and the Conservatives saw a resurgence in Angus and in similar places in the northeast. And in the ward you're standing in, I see the SNP had a popular vote lead in 2012, but in 2017 the Conservatives had a massive lead, and I think the SNP candidates in combination got about 28% of the votes. So what do you think the state of play is in Angus? I mean, do you think things have moved back towards pro-independence candidates, back towards the SNP, and potentially towards Alba?
I hope so. I think the main reason so many people voted for SNP back in 2012 was because we genuinely seen that independence was within reach. And then after that, it no longer was. And I think people were scared to vote for independence. But now I think, again, it could be within reach. And I definitely think Alba, they are a pro-independent party. They genuinely want independence. As for if I'll get voted in, I don't know. I don't know how well known I am there. I don't know if the people will align enough with my principles. And I hope people will see Alba as an alternative to SNP, an alternative that really does want independence. There's not been any women councillors in the ward that I'm standing in. So if I was voted in, that would be a massive achievement. I would actually be one of the first women councillors to be voted in. So I don't know, it's anyone's game just now. I'd love to get voted in. I hope I get voted in, but there's a lot of work to do.
Is it your home ward? Is it the ward you actually live in?
Yeah. My local ward, yeah.
Well, in terms of your profile, I mean, there can hardly be anybody who's better known than you are, because, I mean, you were headlines probably even outside the UK. You're very well known. Okay, so one thing that might happen in these council election campaign, there might be an announcement from the SNP Green government on an introduction of a referendum bill, and for a Scottish independence referendum, supposedly to be held next year. And there's going to be a big gulf in perception on this, because people who are loyal to the SNP will argue that, there you go, we told you they would keep their promise, here they are, they've kept their promise. Whereas people in Alba like you and me would maybe think this is like a sounding light show, it's a bit of a charade, and it's like setting up for a request to Westminster, which Westminster are going to say no to, and then the SNP will argue, this is outrageous, you must vote SNP in 2024 and then in 2026 to show that Scotland will not stand for this. So if by any chance a referendum bill is introduced during the course of this campaign, how do you think it might affect Alba's chances of winning over, say, committed SNP supporters? Do you think that will be a problem?
I don't know. I think Alba have got a good chance. SNP, they've always had the stronghold when it comes to independence, and I think people know SNP for independence. I think if you look at Alba, you've got Alex Salmond, and when he was the First Minister, he did a really good job. He was a very successful First Minister. He was a very likeable First Minister, and I felt like when he promised something, he tried his hardest to follow through with it. So I hope that people will see Alex Salmond run Alba and they'll realise it's not just a small party that's, shouting about independence, but it's a small party just now that's serious about independence. And I think if people look into SNP and into Alba, they'll realise that Alba really does have strong core values that are in line with most people. Whereas SNP, they've sort of gone off the path a little bit and went somewhere else.
You're a great admirer of Alex Salmond, aren't you? I mean, do you think we keep hearing, of course, that his polling figures are bad and so on? Do you think that is a problem for Alba, the leadership question?
I don't know if his polling figures are bad. We only know what we are told by the mainstream media. So for me, I don't know. I personally, I do admire him. I think he was a really good leader, and like I say, he led us through, and he was good with it. But I don't know what the true polling figures are. I've never asked. I've never voted. I've never been on a sample vote, so I don't know how true the figures are.
Okay, so have you been out speaking to people? Have you got any sense of the moods of what you got a sample of the reaction you're getting as an Alba candidate?
Yeah, so we've done street stalls and I've been ringing doors and things with leaflets, and a lot of the thing I find is when I'm doing the street stalls, people say, oh, you're just SNP, and we have to say, oh no, we're not SNP, and you actually explain to them that you're Alba and you speak to them a little bit, and at that point they're like, oh right, okay, so you're actually not the SNP. And I think a lot of people are deterred because they think that Alba and SNP are maybe the same thing, whereas we're not, obviously. And I think that is putting people off voting for Alba who have obviously left SNP for their own reasons.
So you think it might actually be an advantage to Alba to be seen as very distinct from the SNP rather than a disadvantage, which some people would argue it is? I
think Alba need to make it known that we are a very different party. We're not SNP. Obviously, SNP say they're pro-independence. Alba are pro-independence, and I think that needs to be known. We're not the same. We're not the same party. We're very different parties.
What about the challenges of the voting system, the preferential voting system? Are you going to make an effort to sort of try and explain to people that even if you don't give your first preference to me, you can give your second, third, or fourth preference? Is that going to be a difficult conversation that makes it more complicated?
I have been doing that. I think a few of the people I've spoken to actually didn't realise that it's like a ranked vote sort of thing. Yeah. They thought it was just ticking the box. So I have been explaining to people that it's ranked, and I've said to them, listen, even like I was speaking to a lovely family about chicken coops of all things. They are obviously Tories, and I had said to them, you can still give me a vote. Well, no, we don't vote for independence. I was like, but you don't have to vote for independence. You can still give the Conservatives your first vote, but you could give me your second or third. I would appreciate that. And they hadn't realised that you could actually vote for multiple parties. I think a few people are under the impression that you can only vote for one person. And somebody told me a story about a man who was voting in one of the STB elections, and he thought that you ranked 10 to 1. So you gave the highest number to the person that you wanted. So I have dropped that in a conversation that if you want to vote for me, give me like a 1, 2, or 3, because 10 is not the number to give me.
Well, that was unfortunate if he gave the completely wrong order and he elected the person he wanted last. That's a complete disaster. But if you actually got onto Angus Council, in practical terms, what do you think you would prioritise? What do you think you would do on the council?
I want to go into the education board. I think, Scotland's education used to be absolutely outstanding. It was the crown jewels of Scotland. And I think I've got 2 children in schools in Angus, and I can see myself that sort of slipped. And I think we need to get that back up there, and we need to start looking after children better than what we are as well. For me, it's mostly about the poverty and the children, and obviously women's rights comes into that and independence, but my main drive is children in poverty.
Okay, well,
and potholes.
Yeah. Well, you're juggling dogs and you've got to go in the school run, so I think I'd probably better let you go. But I'm really grateful for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And that was episode 15 of the Scot Goes podcast. Hopefully we'll be back for another episode soon. But in the meantime, keep checking the Scot Goes Pop blog for the latest polling news and political commentary. So until the next time, see you later.